When you have a new president, President-elect Biden has started to announce some of the key foreign policy positions and national security positions that are going to make up his administration. And I wanted to get a better picture of what it looks like in terms of where the actions stem from. What sort of executive actions could a new administration take when it comes to China policy? And what sort of actions are they going to have to look to lawmakers down the street on Capitol Hill to find some sort of bipartisan way forward?
Well, I think the U.S. has made a lot of executive actions in terms of Chinese investments. So, for example, on trying to block the apps of TikTok and WeChat, blocking Chinese investments related to companies that are controlled by the Chinese military, limiting access to Chinese scholars and other people staying in the country that are tied to the Chinese military. And across the board, the U.S. has this policy which is called reciprocity, which is, why do we let the Chinese do stuff that they don't allow us to do? So, for example, U.S. diplomats can't go anywhere in China unless they get permission. We used to let Chinese diplomats go anywhere they want and talk to anybody they want to. Now we don't. So there's a whole whole lineup of executive orders essentially limiting Chinese access and essentially punishing Chinese behavior. The Biden team could walk in if there was a Biden team, they could walk in on day one and they could eliminate all of those, saying, okay, well, that's a gesture to China. But of course, that's a problem because none of those things are really punishing China. Really, all those things really are treating the Chinese the way the Chinese treat us. And if we stop doing that, it's not a gesture of friendship. It's just basically a gesture of weakness. So literally all the things you could do by executive order, which would back off what we're doing now, I think would really be seen as the Chinese as a play of weakness. Conversely, you could continue to kind of do the things that we're doing now, limiting Chinese access and other things under the notion of reciprocity. We shouldn't give the Chinese a free lunch when they don't treat us the same way in terms of how they treat our companies and everything else. That would actually, I think, send a very, very strong signal to the Chinese that that doesn't matter if you go from one administration to the next, that American policy is consistent. And actually, consistency of policy is probably the most important thing if you want to change Chinese behavior. Look, you always hear on the campaign trail, everybody says, well, what the other guy did was terrible. I'm going to do all the opposite. Well, this is, maybe you don't like Trump's hair or tweeting or anything else. But the reality is if you look at foreign policy, particularly on the big issues, and particularly on China, on virtually all the issues, you want to use different rhetoric, fine. You want to say we're doing things differently, fine. Because the Chinese don't pay attention anyway. But actually changing the policies would be a big mistake. I'll give you a good example. The one thing the Biden team has talked about is we're going to rejoin the World Health Organization. Well, the World Health Organization performed horribly during the pandemic. Much of the reason why they performed so poorly is because they were so susceptible to pressure from China. The U.S. put a reform agenda on the table and says, if you don't do these things, your performance is not credible. The World Health Organization refused to do those things. And so to essentially go back and rejoin the World Health Organization, knowing there's zero chance for reform, essentially validates Chinese behavior in the WHO. That is not a sign of I'm willing to work in international organizations. That's a sign of weakness.
And it certainly makes it difficult amid this pandemic when there is talk of trying to hold the Chinese accountable for the early days of COVID-19. I guess my last question has to do with that. I mean, do you see an incoming Biden administration taking any sort of tough approach on China when it comes to the accountability part of COVID-19? And how does the idea of rejoining the World Health Organization play into that ability? Because we know the relationship between the World Health Organization and the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, I mean, I do want to put this on the table because it's really important part of the bigger picture. International organizations like the World Health Organization are no longer places where people go to establish international norms and cooperate. These are battlefields in great power competition where the Chinese are in there trying to manipulate these organizations for their outcomes. And the last thing I would say is people say lots of things on the campaign trail. Who knows if that actually influences what they actually do or not. The campaign rhetoric from the Biden administration was all wrong on China. It wasn't tough. What we really need is an administration that's going to be tough on China. But oftentimes you hear people have campaign rhetoric and do different. You know, Woodrow Wilson and FDR both got elected on a platform of keeping America out of the war. Both of them took us to war. So we'll have to wait and see.
Among many other things, people are waiting to see, you know, what exactly is going to play out in terms of control on Capitol Hill as well, because that certainly will play a role in any administration's ability to continue to do the work they do. James Carafano, the VP for National Security and Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation. James, thank you for your time.
Thanks for watching the Heritage Foundation's YouTube channel. With more than 500,000 members, we are the nation's largest conservative research and education institution. We believe the principles and ideas of the American founding are worth conserving and renewing. Please help us further our mission by subscribing to this channel and sharing our videos with your family and friends.